Good morning and a good Chodesh. With the help of Hashem, we are learning today Yerushalmi Trumais Perek Beis, Halacha Aleph, and today, God willing, we're moving into Halacha Beis. We're learning Daf Chaf Beis. We left off on Daf Chaf Aleph, Amid Beis, 5 lines before the bottom of the Amid by the dot Tanei. And let's quickly review the following: that if a person, God forbid, cooks on Shabbos, hamavashel b'Shabbos, and as we learned, that really this discussion is also relevant to any Maaseh Shabbos, for any act that was done on Shabbos that violates the Shabbos. Nevertheless, the discussion is regarding cooking. We had learned in the previous year a 3-way machloikes tanoim. Then we found a 4th tana, and what we will focus today is on the opinions of the first 2, the tanoim, Rabbi Meir, which is our Mishnah, and Rabbi Yehuda, which is the halacha. And let me just quote the words of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. And actually, when we learned it, we needed to correct ourselves because there is some ambiguity in the words of Rabbi Yehuda. And actually, the beginning of today's share is to clarify the proper meaning of Shitas Rabbi Yehuda. But let me just quote the words. Hamavashel b'Shabbos. Rabbi Meir says, like it says in our Mishnah, Shoigig yoichal. And as we learned, whether it's others, Rav Meir is even lenient by the violator himself, that he also is allowed to eat it on Shabbos because they did it b'shoigig. And then Rav Meir says, b'mezid lo yoichal. And as we learned in the Mishnah, Rav Meir is only speaking about not eating it on Shabbos. But after Shabbos, and let's add b'chdei sheyasu, both he and others are allowed to eat it. Okay, you got that clear. Rabbi Yehuda, and again, the words of Rabbi Yehuda is B'shoigeg yoichel l'matzei Shabbos. And even though Rabbi Yehuda is not clarifying when Matzei Shabbos, again, we're going to understand Pshat in Rabbi Yehuda that he and others can eat it b'matzei Shabbos only after b'chdei sheye'asu, in order for there not to be a benefit from something that was done on Shabbos. Then Rabbi Yehuda says the words b'mezid lo yoichal oilamis. B'mezid, it may never be eaten. And we have to clarify that what is Rabbi Yehuda talking about? That the violator is never allowed to eat it. But other people will be allowed to eat it matzei Shabbos b'chdei sheye'asu. So all of these English words that we put in there were not explicitly said by Rabbi Yehuda. All Rabbi Yehuda said is b'shoigig yoichel l'matzei Shabbos, b'mezid lo yoichal oilamis. And now we're going to see in a brayso that indeed this is the correct pshat in Rabbi Yehuda. Another quick intro that we learned at the end of yesterday's shir, that unlike this topic of Rabbi Yehuda, of Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Yechanan Sandler, Rabbi Shmuel ben Oishla, Rabbi Yechanan ben Bereika, there is another topic, and that is, as an example, shehiha, which would mean that if someone prior to Shabbos put a pot of food on the fire without covering the fire, without putting on a blech, without covering it in a plata, if the food was not fully cooked before Shabbos, in most circumstances, that is a violation of an Isur D'Rabbanan, because there is a fear that a person absent-mindedly, when he walks by his kitchen, seeing that the food is not yet ready, they would stoke the coals to make sure that the food will get properly ready. And that stoking the coals on Shabbos is an Isur D'Oraisa. So therefore, we have to cover the blech. If a person did not cover their blech, so there, even though initially we were a lot more lenient because it's only a rabbinic violation, but what we learned is after certain steps, after when this happened during the times of the second Beis Hamikdash, ultimately they made a takana that if a person violated shehiyah, that person may never eat it, even if it was b'shoigig. It's called kansinon shoigig otomezit. What we will learn today is a brayso that will also speak about shehiyah, but that is prior to the time where we made shehiyah even more chamur than bishul b'Shabbos. The brayso that we will look about will equate cooking on Shabbos biblically, or even, God forbid, rabbinically, there was a time that they shared the same halacha, which is, a learned person would say, machlokes Rab Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yochanan Sandler. And again, we're going to focus today on Shitas Rab Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Now, we will also move on today to focus on the final topic of Halacha Aleph, and that is the contrast that the Mishnah gave between someone who plants a tree on Shabbos. Planting a tree on Shabbos, we'll see at times, midrabanan, you have to uproot the tree. But there we differentiate in our Mishnah between shogeg and mezid. The shogeg, you can leave the tree in the ground. But mezid, you planted a tree on Shabbos. The rabbi says you got to uproot the tree. What about if someone planted a tree on the Shemitah year, on Shvius? Our Mishnah was very stringent. Our Mishnah says, even if you only did it b'shogeg, you also have to uproot the tree. And the question would be, why would Shvius be more strict than Shabbos? Shabbos is very strict. Actually, if someone violates Shabbos, b'mezid, the chayiv skila, chayiv kares, we don't have such a high penalty for the violation of planting a tree on Shvi'is. So you would think if the punishment is lesser, so the consequence should be lesser. So we'll see actually two reasons why, even though it's really subject to a machlokes Tanoim, what we learned in the Mishnah is not according to all of the Tanoim, but we'll explain why our Tana holds that we are more machmir on Shvi'is than on Shabbos. I just want to also tell people that, again, we just came off Masechta Shvi'is, just to review something very important. Even though the Torah it's planting on Shvi'is, a prohibition that goes back into pre-Shvi'is. And that's because after you plant a tree, it takes a certain amount of time for the seed to take root. How long does it take for it to take root? Physically, it is what it is. The question is, at what point of its development do we halachically say it took root? It's a three-way machlokes tanoim. You have to remember all this. One opinion holds 3 days. One opinion holds 2 weeks. One opinion holds 30 days. In other words, there's an opinion that says that for the first 30 days after you plant a tree, whatever is developing under the ground is not called a root yet. When does it take root? 30 days later, which would mean that you're not allowed to plant a tree even 30 days before Shvi'is, because God says don't plant it on Shvi'is. We're going to define planting, not just putting the seed in the ground. Planting means doing something which would make the seed take root. You get it? So if I put a seed in the ground within 30 days of Shvi'is, when is it taking root? On Shvi'is. Here also we're going to see whether the stringencies that were said regarding someone who plants the tree on Shvi'is, that it has to be uprooted. Let's see if we apply that also if someone violated the pre-Shvi'is violation. This will conclude the sugya of Halacha Aleph, and Halacha Beis will tell us about the rule that ein toirimin mimin al she'enoi minoi. You can't take truma from grain for figs or from figs for grain. We're going to clarify the meaning of a species, like white figs for black figs. But today you would say a green apples for red apples, you could, because it's still considered apples. And we're going to learn about the law that you have to give truma from the choicest, from the best product. And the question would be, what do you think is better? Something that's fresher or something that has a longer shelf life? Most of the fruits then were dried out, were pressed and dried out for them to last through the, they didn't have refrigeration. So, fruits go off. But if you take out the moisture, it lasts much longer. What's considered better? Something that's not pressed, like a fig that's not pressed, fresh, but it's only, let's say, I don't know how long does a fig last for? It's a week. It's only going to last for a week. Or is it better to separate truma from pressed figs, even though it's not as yafeh as fresh figs, but it's miskayim. It has a longer shelf life. What do you guys think? In the Mishnah, we're going to see it depends, according to some opinions, whether there's a coin available or not. If there's a coin available, then the best is to give him fresh. Yafeh. If there is no coin available, you're going to separate truma, but until you'll find a coin, maybe the truma will go off. Dear Adarabba, the Chazal say it's better for you to give something that has a longer shelf life, miskayim. Not everyone agrees to this opinion, but that will be the opening topic of Halacha Beis. All right, Chevra, that was a recap of the whole daf that we're learning today. We're starting on daf Chaf Aleph Amid Beis, the last word in the line, Tanei 5 lines from the bottom of the Amid. I know we learned this last year, but let's quickly review. Okay, Chevra Tani, we learned in the Braisa, a woman should not fill her pot, not with a certain bean called asosiyos, nor with another bean that's called turmesin. Chevra turmesin is an example that we learn a lot in Chassidus about, how when Hashem made the world, he made the world incomplete, purposefully incomplete, in order for us to have the mission of completing it. And as an example, you have this bean. We have to cook it 7 times for it to become edible. You understand? In other words, a person should not say, well, this is the way Hashem made me. Hashem is perfect. I'm his creation. I am what I am. No, if there are certain parts in me that are not conforming to the Torah, then that's part of my job, to cook, to change, to modify, to better, to rectify. Anyways, a woman is not allowed to fill up her pot and to put them inside the oven. Erev Shabbos im chashecha. Why is that? We're talking about someone who did not have a blech. In other words, what's the issue? Remember this, Kalev. And I'm just using the words blech. Chazal used grufa, ktuma, they used other words, but that's the same concept. Because if you won't put on the fire something that's going to remind you at Shabbos, when you put something on the fire before Shabbos, and it's in the middle of cooking when Shabbos comes in, it's likely that when you're walking by the kitchen, you might play around with the knobs. That's what we do the whole time. What happens if you're in the kitchen? I'm not that much in the kitchen, but if you're in the kitchen and food is burning, you lower the fire. You do it automatically. You get it? Okay, you're not allowed to do that. Now, what happens if someone violated that? Ve'im nesana, so says the Mishnah, says the Braisa. Then asurim lematzoi Shabbos, you can't eat it on Shabbos. You cannot even eat it after Shabbos right away. You have to wait ad kedei sheyei asu, and this is called the knas for a person, right? Not to have hana'ah from Melecha Shabbos. And again, what was the issue? This Braisa is not talking about biblical cooking. This Braisa is talking about Shehiyah, rabbinic cooking. And this Braisa was authored prior to the time where they made rabbinic law more stringent than biblical law. Okay, now, the question is this Braisa following Rabbi Meir? Is this Braisa following Rabbi Yehuda? That's where we left off last time. So Machlokes Amoraim says Rav Acha that our Braisa speaking about someone who filled up the oven, Shehiyah, but they did it b'mezid, and therefore when the Mishnah says that you have to wait until Matzah Shabbos b'chdei sheyei asu, see, now you see the beauty. The words of Rabbi Meir is b'mezid lo yoichal. We keep on insisting, and Baruch Hashem, we got it right. But mezid lo yoichel only means you can't eat it on Shabbos. After Shabbos, you could eat it. And more than that, you can't even eat it immediately after Shabbos. You have to wait. So if this Braisa follows Rabbi Meir, now we clarify the sheet of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yossi doesn't want to learn the Braisa like Rabbi Meir. Actually, the Rash Ilio says what they are really arguing about is, like, whom do we paskin? Do we paskin like Rabbi Meir? If we paskin like Rabbi Meir because our Mishnah, Stam Mishnah Rabbi Meir, then it's advantageous, it's better to learn another Braisa like the Halach, like Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yossi holds that we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. So therefore, if we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, he would prefer that if you have a Braisa without knowing who authored it, let's make the Braisa go conforming Halacha, according to him, like Rabbi Yehuda. Now, what were the words of Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Yehuda said the words, B'shoigig yoichel l'matzei Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda never said the words b'chdei sheyei asu. We are saying the words in Rabbi Yehuda b'chdei sheyei asu. So again, it clarifies. Beautiful. Rabbi Yossi Omer b'shoigeg ki Rabbi Yehuda. And as the Rash Ilio, before we go to Daf Chav Beis, so today's Daf, he actually brings down over here that the Rambam paskins like Rabbi Yehuda. So paskins the Rif. So paskins the Smag. I'm sorry. The Smag paskins like Rabbi Meir. We begin based kipsak Rabbi Yehuda, as we mentioned when we began to learn the sugya and va'ayin and Shulchan Aruch Shin Yud Ches, right, for all of the details of mevashel b'Shabbos. Dan, very good, right? You told me the Shin Yud Ches. Daf Chav Beis, come on top of the Amid. Amar Rav Mana Yous Amar Rabbi Yossi. The Amoyre Rabbi Yossi that says the Braisa follows the Tana Rabbi Yehuda Zagut. Where do I get that from? Again, what's the chiddush? The chiddush is that Rabbi Yehuda, the words of Rabbi Yehuda is to appreciate it. All Rabbi Yehuda says is if someone cooked on Shabbos b'shoigeg, they can yoichel matzah Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda never said the words b'chdei sheyeyasu. If this Braisa follows Rabbi Yehuda, then we have to learn in Rabbi Yehuda that even though Rabbi Yehuda says ad l'matzah Shabbos, it doesn't mean you can eat it immediately. No, you have to wait even after Shabbos goes out, the time that it takes to make that pot, which makes sense for you not to have any benefit from Maaseh Shabbos. Now, where will I get that from? Bishitas Rabbi Yehuda, from a topic that's similar but not the same. What's the topic that's similar but not the same, which is also something that we mentioned in our Mishnah, that Hanuteya b'Shabbos, what happens if you plant a tree on Shabbos? So b'shoigeg yekayim, b'mezid yakor. And there, the Braisa writes, by the way, what we're learning right now in the Braisa is exactly what we learned in the Mishnah, and as it will become clear, that Shitas Rabbi Meir. Our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir. We already established that our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir because Hamevashal b'Shabbos, our Mishnah says, b'shoigeg yoichal b'mezid lo yoichal. B'shvi'is, in contrast, if you plant a tree on Shvi'is, bein b'shoigeg, bein b'mezid, right, like our Mishnah wrote, you have to uproot the tree. We'll see in a moment why Shvi'is is more chamer than Shabbos. That's all the Stam Tanakama, and we know that is Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda Oimer Chiluf Advarim, the opposite. B'Shvi'is, if a person plants on Shvi'is, there we allow ourselves to differentiate between Shoigeg and Mezid by saying B'Shoigeg, okay, the guy didn't know, let's say he didn't know it's Shvi'is, then Yekayim, then you can leave the tree post facto. B'Mezid, you have to uproot it. Again, we'll see later more about that. B'Shabbos, but B'Shabbos, bein b'shoigeg, bein b'mezid, yaker, gevaldik. Now, why do you have to uproot the tree? If you did it b'shoigeg, because mipnei shahanoah Shabbos olav. Because we don't allow for you to benefit from a Shabbos violation, even though you did it b'shoigeg. That is Shitas Rabbi Yehuda. Now, let's bring it back to cooking. Once we know that Rabbi Yehuda does not allow a person to have hana'ah from something that was done on Shabbos, even if it was done b'shoigeg. If you cooked on Shabbos b'shoigeg, even though the words of Rabbi Yehuda is that after Shabbos you can eat it, b'shoigeg yoichel matzah Shabbos, if you won't have to add matzah Shabbos, the b'chdei sheyasu, you're having hana'ah from Shabbos. Notice now that we see from the Braisa that the logic behind Rabbi Yehuda is mipnei shahanoah Shabbos olav. So it's self-understood, Vikan, that by Bishul, you'll have to add the B'chdei Sheyasu. V'kiven she'ato oimer hamten l'matzi Shabbos ad kedei sheyasu. Only then is it k'mishu lo nehena machma Shabbos klum. But if you're going to learn the Pshat in Rabbi Yehuda k'pshutai, b'shoigeg yoichel l'matzi Shabbos. Matzi Shabbos means right after Shabbos. Then you are still benefiting from what you did on Shabbos. Then it wouldn't make sense. Rabbi Yehuda is saying you have to uproot a tree. Yeah. Because if you won't uproot it, you're having hana. You can't have any hana, even b'shoigeg. The same thing has to be by bishul, which demands for us to understand Rabbi Yehuda means b'chdei sheyasu. Okay, so that clarified Rabbi Meir. That clarified Rabbi Yehuda. Now let's focus on this last contrast between Shabbos and Shvi'is. Machloikes. Now we know Rabbi Meir, our Mishnah, and Rabbi Yehuda. Where are we more machmer? Okay. And even though that we know that the Tanakam is Rabbi Meir, since the Braisa did not give it a name, since our Mishnah did not name the stam difference that we are more machmer on Shvi'is than on Shabbos, we have to understand matam de Rabbanan, which is the consensus. Matam de Rabbi Yehuda is self-understood. I'll tell you right away, guys. Shabbos, the punishment is skila. Makes more sense that you should be more machmer by Shabbos. But to say versus Shvi'is. But to say that, no, Shabbos, we allow ourselves to say, b'shoigeg, you're good. If you planted a tree b'shoigeg, you can leave it. And by Shvi'is, if you planted it b'shoigeg, you have to uproot it even. So the Gemara gives two different approaches. And the Gemara is going to give us two nafkaminas from these two approaches. Number one, that people were nechshetu al Shvi'is. Exactly. Since Shabbos is more strict than Shvius, compounded with, it seems like it was a bigger nisayon to keep Shvius than Shabbos, not minimizing anyone's nisayonis over here. For some reason, it turned out that there were more people that were lax, let's say, when it came to Shvius, so we suspected them from keeping Shvius. And when you have such a thing, to be able to differentiate between Shogeg and Mezit, you open yourself up to the possibility that if someone is going to do it b'mezit, and he's going to say, I did it b'shoigig. Who would do that? Only someone who will allow himself to be a violator. Chazal felt that more people are allowing themselves to violate Shvius. And they're going to cover up, right? They're going to hide behind shoigig. So they said, no. By Shvius, no, okay, you did it b'shoigig, you're tzaddik, you have to uproot the tree. Since v'loy nechshatu al Shabbos, generally people don't want to violate Shabbos. So therefore, they were not afraid that someone will hide behind the shoigig. So you allow the main rule to function, which is not like Rabbi Yochanan HaSandler that says that midairaisa there's like an iser chefza. No, you're not allowed to violate Shabbos. You did it b'shoigig. Okay, you did it. You have to bring a carbon chatas, but you don't have to uproot the tree. That's one difference. Makes sense. Davar acher. Where do you have davar acher a lot? In Rashi, right? In the Bavli, how do we say another answer? Inami. Right? Just remember the different expressions. But davar acher, moinim l'shvius. This is gavaldik. There are consequences of which year was the tree planted in, not only concerning were you allowed to plant it, what do you need to know when was this tree planted? For a law that's even practiced chutz la'aretz. Arla. Everyone here in the shul, whoever planted a tree, they always, when is it Arla, when is it not Arla? And further, when it's Arla and in the Holy Land, then it's the fourth year, right? Net Revoi. So when you have a tree and people are constantly focusing on when can I finally have the fruits, you're constantly reminding yourselves, you're cheshboning, when did I plant it? I want you to know, like we mentioned in the intro, it's not so pashut. When did I plant it? Forget about Shvius for a second. Again, three-way machlokas tanoim. Let's follow the Tana that says that if I plant a tree today is the second day of Chodesh Elul, right? Elul only has 29 days. If I were to plant a tree today, since the halachic taking root, according to one Tana, is 30 days later, it's really Ki'ilu, it was planted on the first day of Tavshin Pevav. And when you begin counting the Arla, you begin counting from Tavshin Pevav. Okay, let's delete this detail of 30 days prior. Just you cheshbon, and therefore Tavshin Pevav is 1 year. Tavshin Pei Zayin, Tavshin Pei Ches is the third year. Really, Tavshin Pei Tes is not mated the fruits. You have to wait until Tu B'Av. But people are always going backwards. Where are we up to? When it was planted? Tu B'Shvat. Thank you for the correction. So therefore, since people are moinim l'shvi'is, people are always counting back. So if someone violated, you know what's going to happen? Even if they did it b'shoigig, people are always going to remember, this tree was planted then? It's already, we're already in the third year. It's already the fourth year. They're going to always remember when it was planted. And if it was planted on Shvius, people erroneously might come and think you can plant it on Shvius. No, it's when a person makes a mistake, if it's going to be constantly known that the mistake was made, especially if some people might even justify themselves, well, if that guy did it, I can do it. So then we want you to uproot the tree. Of course, it's a horrible thing to cook on Shabbos. But if someone cooked on Shabbos, there's no other halacha that, let's say the food is here on Monday. Is the food 2 days old or 1 day old? Maybe it's fresher if it's only 1 day old. You understand? But there's no consequence. There's no reason for people to constantly remind themselves because they have to make the cheshbon. When did you cook it? That's a great nafkamina. So therefore, Chazal were more machmer by Shvius. Chazal didn't find that reason to be machmer. Now, if you did it b'shoigig, then you can eat it. If you did it b'mezit, you can't. And a chanami. But b'shoigig, the tree can stand. Shvius, you have to keep record for other halachas. Exactly. Thank you. Now, Shvius, you do have to. Now, the Gemara is speaking out, like I mentioned, there's two reasons. The two reasons will affect two nafkaminas. Nafkamina number one, that's the meaning of Eich Avida. What's the nafkamina? That not apachas mishloishim yom lifnei shaviis. Even though our Mishnah, this Braisa, did not say when it was planted. It says if you planted it on Shvius. Now, like we mentioned, by heart, the issur of planting on the 7th year isn't only not to plant on the 7th year, it also goes back either 3 days, within 3 days, within 2 weeks, or within 30 days. We're going to go within the 30 days. So what's going to happen if someone planted it within the 30 days? And now it entered in Shvius. I want to know right now, according to this Tana that says that planting on Shvius demands a penalty, regardless, shoygig or mezit, you have to uproot it. Do we apply this penalty if you planted it within the 30 days? Do you apply the penalty? So if the reason is in Teimar Chshad, in other words, people are counting back, so then, I'm sorry, Chshad means that people are lax when it comes to Shvius. Here, Ein Kan Chshad. Why Ein Kan Chshad, Danny? The very fact that this person was careful not to plant it on Shvius, you know, a person who makes an effort to say in Yiddish, Chaparain, Shvius is coming, let's plant before Shvius. That already indicates that this is a person that does take Shvius seriously. We're not concerned that this guy is going to do it b'mezid and he's going to cover. If he would be such a type of guy, he would plant it on Shvius. But if the reason is in Teimar Moinen, it's because people are going to, they have to, for the dinam of Orla, Netadevoy, people are going to make the calculations regardless. So then, when people make the calculations, according to this Tana that holds that it only takes root 30 days after you plant it, and that's the first year, so people will constantly be reminded that this is a tree that was planted on the Shvius year. Yesh kan moinen, and therefore, even if the violation was only pre-Shvius planting, it will also have to be uprooted. That's nafkamina number one, whether the reason why we are machmir by Shvius is because of chshad or because of moinen. Nafkamina number two, counting. We count backwards. Not apachas mishloshim lifnei sheminis, similar but not the same. Now we're not talking about someone who planted it within 30 days before Shvius, which is prohibited. Now we're speaking about someone who mamish broke Shvius. He planted it on the 7th year, but within 30 days before the end of the year. Now, the same thing, Kalev, Halt Kop. If someone, God forbid, if he plants it on the 15th of Elul, even now, Rosh Chodesh Elul is only 29, within 30 days. What year is this is for the Ardl account? When does the year begin? On the 8th year. So when people are going to constantly be counting backwards, they won't know it was planted on the 7th because this is not a tree of the 7th. This is a tree of the 8th or of the 1st. So if the issue, and we're speaking about someone who did it b'shoigig, and really, me'ikir adin by shoigig, we should be lenient. That's Rav Meir, b'shoigig yoichal, b'shoigig lo yakab. So if you planted it within 30 days before Sheminis, and now it entered the 8th, which means you really cheshbon it as a product of the 8th, turning to Daf Chav Beis Amid Beis on top of the Amid, in Teimar Chshad, if it's about someone who doesn't care to keep Shvi'is, and this person is using Shoigig as a cover for that person's violation, well, same thing, that's the problem. The guy planted it on the 7th year. If he's going to get away by allowing the tree to stay, because b'shoigig it can stay, then this guy will do it b'mezid. Yesh kan chshad. But in Teimar Moinen, if it's only because of the count, ein kan moinen, like we explained, because this tree belongs to the 8th year, because it was within 30 days of the 8th year. That's gewaldig. Okay, now, again, Keminag HaYerushalmis, they don't even speak out what the next few lines is going to be premised on. Now that we gave these two nafkaminas, now let's take a look in the Mishnah. Now there's a presumption that's difficult to understand because we know that Rabbi is very brief in the Mishnah. Nevertheless, our Gemara is of the opinion that by the fact that our Mishnah did not qualify, did not explain, that our Mishnah allowed itself just to write that when you plan something on Shvis, you have to uproot it without differentiating between before 30 days before the end of the year or within 30 days of the end of the year. That's the Gemara's understanding that our Mishnah holds that even if you planted it within 30 days of the end of the year, you have to uproot it. Is a raya that our Mishnah is not understanding the chumrah of Shvius because of Moinin, which would not apply 30 days before Sheminis. It's applying the issue of Hashad. So now, Va'asya, our Mishnah, Kemanda Omar Mipnei Hashad. I just want to understand, can you just imagine the people who had the years of Moinin? The Yigia that they had in learning Yerushalmi was very difficult. Anyway, we're learning it in the, it's easier when the Girsa just allows everything to flow. Our Mishnah that does not qualify is Araya Ke'ilu, the reason is Chshat. Brom, command Omer Pnei Moinen. We would not say V'konsu Shoyim Pnei Mezid. We would not say that. Of course not. Because no one would know. In andere Werter, the Gemara basically is saying that you are giving me two options in explaining the sheet of the Rabbanon in the Braisa from our Mishnah Snams, Sima, without qualifying. We're concluding that our Mishnah consinon Shoyge Gotomezit, that the Iker reason is because Achshad. And Chshad, we just learned, for those of us who learn Masechta Shvius, sadly, many people said, that Nechshatu ala Shvius, there's such a concept. We never had the Nechshatu ala Shabbos. We don't have that. We had the Amoritz, they were Nechshatu ala Shvius, they were Nechshatu ala Tumantara. Certain things became like Shabbos, never became lax in the times of Chazal. Yeah, then there's no difference.
At the end of the 6th year, within 30 days of the
Gemara is not saying it over here. Then b'shogeg, yeah, and that also fits with our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says if you planted it on the 7th year, you have to uproot it. And we're being medayik, that means in the 7th year, even in the last 30 days. But on the 6th year, even if it was within, you don't have to uproot it. I'm just making an observation that we're so familiar where the Mishnah says something, and the Gemara qualifies the Mishnah. We never found a problem in before in saying, the Gemara says the Mishnah is only speaking about a certain case. We just learned the Mishnah before, right? If you did that, if you were trading right from the oil on the olives, Yachser v'yitraim. Says the Gemara, hold on, Yachser v'yitraim, if you lose it. That we could say, but this diuk. That's why there was other girsois. Okay, anyways, it's just fascinating. It's fascinating. We can't say both reasons apply for the way the Gemara is thinking. Then he's saying good, not we can't say. The Gemara here is not saying it. We are familiar with those who would say this and that. Two reasons, and therefore both 30 days prior and the last 30 days is Yakar. We know such Jews. And then who knows what they do to take revenge on that. It's too much. Okay, and halacha base. Okay, so there's two dinim in our Mishnah. One of them again, there's the din of Truma has to be given mimin al minoi, not mimin al she'ena minoi. The next din of our Mishnah is the din, you have to lechatchila at least give Truma mikol chelboy. Chelboy literally, which means its fattiest part. Fat is considered something amazing. Should gain a couple of pounds, and you have to give Truma from the choicest. What's choicest? Fresh, durable. And the Gemara, the Mishnah is not going to really ask that. You'll see from the Mishnah that fresh is considered better than durable if the kohen is benimtza. If there's no kohen, then what's better is the pressed figs because they last longer. Okay, says the Mishnah. First of all, ein tardamin mimin al she'ena minoi. Now, mimin al she'ena minoi, just to make it clear, all of the 5 grains is one min. The Mishnah will say that all of the figs, just the example, because they had black figs, they had white figs, they had all different types. That's called the same type. You could give from one on the other. Mimin al she'ena mina would mean you can't separate truma from wine to wheat. Right? We make kiddush, we cover the challah. There's a great example. It's two different things. Not only that, but ve'im taram, if you made such a separation, ein truma say truma. What does it mean, ein truma say truma? Guys, let's go back to the basics. It means what you separated has no sanctity. It means that the product from which you separated the truma remains tevel the way it's before. If someone consumes it, chayv misa b'dei shamayim. What you did is nothing. Now let's define species. How do you define the species? Someone asked over here, red apples on green apples. We'll see, it's considered the same species. Kol min chitim echatu. All of types of grains, all varieties of I'm sorry, take back, not all grains. Chitim is wheat. Slicha, I made a mistake. Now, if I recollect properly, that from the 5 grains, spelt is considered like a tulda of chitim. And shifain and shabayil shual is considered a min of barley. This is correct, hopefully. But that I think it's correct. So kol min chitim echata. Also, kol min te'enim. By te'enim, it gets really interesting because some people would have te'enim. Te'enim means fresh figs. Groigeris means dried figs. Not barley. Devela means pressed figs. We don't say that since you process them differently, now they are different species. They all continuously are considered the same min. And what we'll see later, just these other words, black figs, white figs. So like a fresh white fig and a pressed black fig is the same thing. V'toinim is elzeh. It's all one min. Now, next in the Mishnah, you have to give min hayafa. Yafa would mean, now that we spoke about figs, fresh is considered superior to pressed. Even though, we're speaking objectively, even though pressed is more durable because they took out the juices, it would last longer, fresh objectively. The question is, do you give from what's objectively better, or do you have to give only from what's subjectively better? There's no coin when there's no coin available. There's no coin. When will the coin come? He can come show up today in the shtetl. The coin can come in a month. The pressed figs will last a month. If you're going to separate fresh, I separate. Separating is what's misakein, the remaining product. The giving to the coin doesn't have to be done right away. Right? There were 2 times in the 7-year cycle before the vidui maisres where you needed to give it. We're going to get to that later. So I separate it. Well, you can argue, well, you have to separate objectively. What's better is fresh. So that's the mission over here. Kol makim sheyesh koyin. If there is a koyin, doesn't mean that there's a koyin in the room. It means that let's say a fresh fig would last, I don't know, a week. And in my village, there is a koyin. It can take me a day to get to him. It's still fine. In other words, as far as I know, the fresh fig will be advantageous for the recipient who should get it when it's still fresh. Then toidem min hayafe, which means from fresh. In other words, the Mishnah is saying as a premise that fresh is superior to durable. It's called yafe versus miskayim. Kol makayim she'ein koyin. But if there isn't a koyin, Tanakam of the Mishnah holds, you give the definition of yafe has to be subjective. And therefore, what you give is dafke. And now we already said, so if I have both fresh and pressed, the Mishnah already says I can separate from one on the other. It's called min al minoi. So separate the truma from the miskayim, from the pressed, from the develas, from the groigerisen, and not from the te'enim. Once it's done, he's saying once it's done, because that's another rule that when it comes to this giving min hayafa al hara, v'loy min hara al hayafa, we're going to learn that explicitly later. That's only a din of lechatchila. So we're learning about lechatchila. That's the Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda Oimer, no. I love this. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda holds that you have to separate truma from what is superior objectively. Gewaldik. And that's a din. I want to look inside the Marafulda. It's a little bit lower, middle a bit lower, right? Like 12 lines from the bottom. Because since it says Baharimchem es chelboy mimenu, when you remove the best, even though again this pasuk, anything you're reading in Koirach is mitzvahs on the Levi. For the Levi's meiser min ha-meiser. But we learn, right? Masroi Seichem also teaches us that whatever is the rule when it comes to Trumas Meiser, same is the rule for Truma Gedoyla. So it's a din Chelba means you have to give from the best. In other words, if God is commanding me to give from the best, Lo Oilam Be'inan Chelboi, I always have to separate from the best. Fresh is better from pressed, even if it's going to get ruined. V'i pasad, yipased, or yifsad. It's like the man who buys his wife a gift. She doesn't like it, but it's a good gift. You don't like it? That's your issue. I separated Truma. Rabbi Yehuda. Okay. Next thing. V'toirmin batzel. Another thing about onions. Now we're going to onions. A rule. A larger onion is better than small onion. I'm about to hear something from the Gabbai. Okay, nothing yet. So, Azoy, the Mishnah says, a large onion is better. The tournament batzel katal shalem, but what happens here, if the small onion is a wholesome, any onion that's whole will last longer, and we not go on top of that, that if your onion is cut and peeled, I mean, it's about peeling. I don't want to get it peeling. We know the Alter Rebbe brings in Shulchan Aruch something that the big Shulchan Aruch doesn't. A peeled onion, a peeled egg, and a peeled garlic that was overnighted should not be eaten, period. But coming back over here, unless you put something, and that's the way out. V'tarmin batzel katan shalom, v'loy chatzi batzel gadol. Even though, again, what's the problem with the chatzi batzel gadol? It won't last as long. So what? But if there's a kohen right now, in other words, we don't look at what's objectively better. This is the same neshama. We looked at what's subjectively better. And Rabbi Yehuda l'shitasei, Rabbi Yehuda says no. The Torah says you give from the best. A big onion is considered better. It's cut in half, which means it won't last as long. It's going to evaporate the koyach. Doesn't matter. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, loy, ki elo chatzi batzel katan, yafa trumps, batel gadol. Yafa trumps miskayim, period. How great. Furthermore, v'chein hay Rabbi Yehuda Omer, toirmim bitzalim mibnei hamedina. The Marafulda writes that the onions that you found in cities were better of quality than the onions you found in the villages. I can relate to that. I came from Brazil, and Brazil makes shoes. They make the best shoes in the world, but when you buy shoes in Brazil, it's the biggest shmatas, because all of the good shoes they export. Because everything is grown in the villages. But ironically, in the villages, what do they keep for themselves? The lowest quality, because people there are poor. The onions that you found in cities, that's just my explanation, were better than the onions that you found in the villages. Even though we don't grow anything, I know that's how it works. So, objectively, if you have options, if you have onions that you bought in the Bnei HaMedina, you have onions that you bought in the villages, we know that the ones that you bought in the city is better quality. Then he's giving me, if I can take a picture of the Gabbai's face, he's thinking. And look at the opposite. V'loy kufnu ha'bnei Medina. Why? Look at these words. Mepnei shehu Michael politikis. Because the Bnei HaMedina, they're politicians, mamash. In other words, anashim chashuvim. How ironic that they understood politicians to be anashim chashuvim. Politiki really means nobility. That's what the Marafulda writes. Politika, b'nei palterin. Politics comes from palter, and palterin means palaces. You know, people in the city are wealthier, so what's sold in the city is of better quality. And since you have to give what's objectively better, he's looking always objective. The rule is you give from that which is from the city and not from that which is in the village. A city boy, guys, you chevre, much better than village guys. Yes.
All of it spoiled before you were able to give it to a kohen. You did what you had to do.
That's right, and the kohen lost out.
You don't even have to give it to him.
You give it to him, let him deal. How wonderful is that? Give him a spoiled gift. Wow.